before I get started, I do want to just quickly mention and acknowledge the work of my colleagues, because I did some of the work on this, but Martin Nieto, Martin, can you raise your hand? He was really the brains behind this model, and then the new model that we're working with Wisconsin to develop. And Shufan, can you also raise your hand? Because Shufan is also working on the new model. I just want to give credit where credit is due. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth, although only for 10 minutes or even less about that. But just to, I want to tell you a bit more about the model that we developed and some, I'm not going to say mistakes that we made along the way, but lessons that were learned along the way, because there was a couple of important lessons. Quickly. Some of this I went over this morning. So work on the model began in July 2013. The data that was available to us is probably similar to the data that would be available in Illinois if you were starting to develop a model, you know, to look at some of these things. So ACCAR submissions, family demographics from IDCFS, placement characteristics. So remember that we were looking at the back end of the system. So we did have placement history available to us, maltreatment history. So there was a lot of historical information on each family that was available to us. This tells you a little bit about the sample that we used to develop the model. We used an exit cohort of kids that were reunified. So remember that we were looking at kids that were reunified and trying to predict reentry within 12 months. So we used state fiscal year 2012. We excluded some kids from the sample because they were not eligible for the PS program, so they wouldn't be included in this model. So Milwaukee County was not included because Milwaukee County was not participating in the PS program. And kids with juvenile justice only cases were excluded because they also were not eligible. So of this sample, which was about 1,800 kids, we divided it in half. The first half was used to develop the model. The second half was used to test the model later on once we had the model developed. We were fairly agnostic about what variables to include in the model. We did not really make any judgments about, oh, we're not going to include this or we are going to include this. We looked very broadly with the data that was available to us and tried to come up with as many variables as possible from that data. So there was, you know, on the child and family level, things like gender, race, people's age, disability, family structure, meaning single parent, two-parent, home. Placement history, we had a lot of information about placement history. The CANS domains, so there's several CANS domains. And if you remember, for the first predictive risk model, we wound up not using the CANS because the data just wasn't quite there yet. It was still a little too messy and too inconsistent. And then information from the maltreatment report that led to the child being put into out-of-home care. So, what was the child's relationship to the perpetrator, substantiation, number of prior referrals. Now you'll notice that there's some things that are missing from this list. If you had a wish list, if you were trying to predict reentry into care, and you had a wish list, which we did, there would be things on that wish list that you don't see here. And primarily, there's not a whole lot of information about the caregivers or the parents here. If you think about theoretically what would be related to a child re-entering care after reunification, would be, there's maybe some stressors in the family, maybe the caregiver has some needs that weren't being addressed. So we didn't really have a whole lot of information about that, and that was something that we were aware of when we built the model. So this was the first, these were the factors that remained in the first model. So there were 4 variables that remained. Child disability, and that was from IDCFS. It includes learning disabilities, physical disabilities, developmental disabilities, emotionally disturbed or significant behavior problems. Single parent family, length of time in care prior to reunification. And these I just want to mention, these slides are going to be available on the website afterwards, so you will have access to all of the slides from all of the presentations, just so you don't need to be scribbling down or so yeah, you don't need to worry about that. And then number of service reports prior to the most recent entry into care. If a family had 2 or more service reports, they were at increased risk. Michelle, can you really quickly tell us what a service report is?
A service, yeah, okay, sorry, I'm pretty loud, but a service report is a way in which local agencies can choose, can elect, can volunteer to use our system to highlight that a family has needs, but they do not rise to the level of a child protective services reports. We also use service reports to create other kinds of cases that are not child protective services cases. So those might be situations where kinship care providers need to be opened up into our system so they can receive payment for voluntary kinship care, et cetera. So the service reports are like a grab-all, voluntary, kind of messy place. Now you know I've set the stage for you to go.
And the reason that is important is, so this was it. This was the first RPM. It was implemented in January 2014, and workers were using it to determine eligibility, a family's eligibility for the program. Very quickly, it became apparent that there were a couple of problems with this model. One was the inconsistent use of service reports in the counties. So Wisconsin is a county-based system. Counties do things differently. And one of the ways that they really, really do things differently is in the use of service reports.
Who knew?
We might have known if we would have talked to people before we implemented the model. But so there were some counties that were not getting any kids winding up as eligible for the PS program because they didn't use service reports very often. And so if you don't use service reports, the variable that has 2 or more service reports prior to the most recent out-of-home care episode, you're not gonna have any kids that score high on that. So we had counties saying we don't have any eligible families for the PS program. So that was flag number 1, that something was not well with our RPM. The other one, it was length of time in care prior to reunification. So when we developed the model, we were basing it on historical data. So we knew how long the kid had been in care prior to reunification. But when we implemented the model was used, it could be used at any,
30-ish days.
30 days prior to reunification,
Expected.
maybe a little bit earlier than that. So the worker, when the family was ready to reunify, when the worker felt that the family was ready to reunify, they could run the report, they could, I'm going to call it a button, they could press a button and get a score for the child's, an RPM score. And so the length of time in care prior to reunification was a moving target. It would change depending on when they ran the report. So
you have not made a permanency decision at this point?
Your permanency decision is to reunify. You believe you're really close to reunification based on discussions with their supervisor, the family, courts, etc. And you are going to set the stage to see if the family wants to engage voluntarily in the PS program. And you need to know that they're eligible. So they have to be above the score. So in that 30-day window, you think you're going to be there, you run it, the score is not high enough, or the score is, but you're not ready yet. And you miss your window. So there was this gaming of time frame. It was so temporal in a condition that was not a definitive finite transaction. It could be moved for lots of different reasons. Trial home visits, trial was another area where that becomes really problematic because that's a time in which a child is still in care but they're at home. So this was a very tricky. This variable was very difficult.
It was. And again, this was a lesson that we learned. So there were 2 variables that were problematic for different reasons. Okay, I need to wrap it up. So because of that, we revised the model. About 10 months after we implemented it, we were going to revise it anyway. We were going to retool it after about a year. We just moved the time frame up a little bit. Things we did differently, there was more data that we had to draw on at that point because CAN's data had improved. And so we were able to include canned data in the model. We really looked so hard to try to add as many variables as we could related to the caretaker. There was a very strong belief in the counties that caretaker substance abuse was going to be an important factor to look at. So we really combed through the data to try to add variables. It turns out that it wasn't related, but we wanted to be responsive to their concerns that it was important. And then we got rid of those service reports. And the main thing that we did differently the second time around was that we involved stakeholders at every step along the way. We talked to them about each variable that was presenting in the model and what it meant and how it may differ in the counties. So, yeah, and then, you know, these are the variables that were in the second model. We can talk more about that. You know, if you have questions about that later, but I want to give Michelle time to talk too.
This will be. So as Tami indicated, that first go out the gate was a really, really rough one, and so what we benefited from was the learning opportunity, honestly, and we were very open about that with our county partners. CFRC was very open about that we needed to do something, we did something to leverage this opportunity with a forward waiver. We heard those concerns, we took processes in place that remedied that, both in the development of the model as well as the implementation of the use of the model in our eligibility process. And I think that for me, the biggest lessons that we've learned have made us stronger and smarter as a state, with our partners, with counties, on how to approach this next re-referral process, which I think is in some ways going to be a different kind of a lift. So we've really started to kernel themes with our key partners in ways in which that we want to make sure that we are paying attention to the integrity of the model. We are making sure that we are being responsible about the model being support of the decision-making process, not a replacement of the decision-making process. We're being very transparent about the way in which we're approaching that. We're seeking stakeholder engagement all along the way. We did it at the point of kind of bivariate analysis. We're doing it at the point of multivariate analysis. We're bringing this in front of other key players so that it has that kind of transparency. And we're also wanting to make sure that this is lifting up into a system that already is, we're already capitalizing on the good work that folks are doing at the point of taking information or have taken information over time about kids and families that are being reported to our system, and that we're not adding additional points of burden that come from this model. We wanted to walk into this process with eyes wide open, so we have a very specific set of staff who are our state leads. They've developed a project charter that we've signed on board with our leadership, so everyone knows what the respective roles and responsibilities are between ourselves within the program, between the data and research folks that work inside our state department and our research partners at CFRC. We are thinking very specifically about communication plans with our partners, including folks in the courts, etc. So we've had some initial kerneling of the work that we're doing. This is something that was sanctioned through a 3-branch project that the state did. So this is something that we've been planting seeds around for, I would say, over the last 2 years. We do know that we're going to have some additional consults around the legal and statutory implications of creating a score that helps inform decision making for folks at the point of screening. And our intention is that we would pilot this process so that we have a little bit of sense of how it feels and rolls out, so that we can have a test ground for that. And then we also want to do and think about the roadshow that would include the stakeholders in the roadshow process. And we have, as I mentioned, we have been kerneling this. One of the key places where we think a kernel for our process is important is with our continuous quality improvement advisory group. So that's a multidisciplinary stakeholder group that meets on a regular basis to talk about systems level improvement initiatives
and we view this as a systems level improvement initiative. And there's ways for us to, again, capitalize on those feedback loops so that we are being nimble and flexible in its implementation and responsive to the types of concerns that people would, of course, have about influencing their decision-making process. So those are some of the key, oh geez, there's more. I think we've talked about a lot of the ones. I think that the buy-in and the plans for us to think about what it means for us to do this at a county-run system, which really wouldn't be different in a regional based system within the state. I think there's variations, and you need to be sensitive to that, both on the data quality and who are the community members in their communities, and how do we pay attention to that. So that's